Hello. Welcome to our webinar for Anne Arundel County Public Schools on Discipline and Behavior Management Systems. During this webinar, you will develop an understanding of the impact of preventative behavior strategies on student success, develop a coordinated system for reviewing data and responding to behavior challenges, and establish a system for celebrating successes and making improvements. Let's begin with preventative behavior strategies. Having a system in place that includes proactive measures designed to prevent challenging behaviors before they occur is essential. Some examples include establishing expectations and routines, teaching and reinforcing skills, and collecting and analyzing data. What are some additional proactive strategies that you have found are effective in preventing challenging behaviors? Pause the video as you turn to page 2 in your participant handbook and list additional proactive strategies that have been effective for you. Let's examine the impact of a school-wide preventative behavior strategy. We are going to look at the results of a 4-year study conducted in Maryland. This study took place in 37 Maryland elementary schools. This particular study highlights the impact of positive behavior intervention supports, which incorporates preventative strategies, on student-level outcomes over time between 21 elementary schools that implemented PBIS and 16 who did not. In schools trained in PBIS, teachers reported that their students expressed fewer disruptive behaviors and experienced less concentration problems than those in schools that were not implementing PBIS. Additionally, teachers reported that their students demonstrated greater emotional regulation and more pro-social behaviors than those in non-PBIS schools. Additional research on preventative behavior strategies has identified a number of reasons why we need them. They help us to address issues that have become prevalent, such as teacher burnout and racial inequities in discipline. Let's turn to page 2 in your participant handbook and take a few moments to reflect on your current practices. Have you established expectations? Do you maintain routines? Do you teach and reinforce new skills? Do you collect and analyze data? What evidence do you gather to evaluate the effectiveness of strategies you use or implement? Pause the video while you respond. As you learned in the first webinar in this series, addressing significant disproportionality, collecting, summarizing, and analyzing data is essential in determining if significant disproportionality based on race, gender, and disability category is occurring in your school or district. Analyzing data also ensures that the preventative behavior strategies we are implementing are effective. In the next section, we will explore how to evaluate whether the strategies you are using are achieving the outcomes you desire. Now, let's examine a coordinated system for managing and analyzing discipline and behavior data. Turn to page 2 again in your handbook. Pause the recording as you list all the data sources you are currently using. What is the purpose of each of the data sources you listed? What questions can you answer with each of your data sources? Utilizing data helps us to promote positive behaviors and prevent negative ones, as we are able to identify what practices and strategies are working and which are not. A coordinated system for implementing and maintaining preventative behavior strategies involves a system for data review. This system will include the following practices: data exploration, which is considering the purpose or why of the data; data management, getting and storing the right data; data use, which is analyzing, interpreting, and reporting data; refining and improving, which is examining each element to consider how we can better or more efficiently achieve our purpose. Let's begin with exploring and managing the data. Before you begin to collect data, it is important to consider these questions. Doing so will ensure you are collecting the right data that will help determine if your practices are effective. In the long run, this will save you time and make your data collection efforts more efficient. Questions that you should ask include, what are the specific questions I want to answer using data? What data sources will provide the answer to my question? Where can I access this data? Who else needs to be part of the discussion? Questions that a classroom teacher or administrator might have could include the following examples. How efficiently am I using my resources? How effective is this program or practice? Which students need additional behavior support? Do I need to provide additional training on specific skills? At the top of page 3 in your participant handbook, under the Exploring section, write down a specific question you have that you would like to answer using your own data. You will reference your response to this question later in the webinar. Let's consider the data sources that are available to you. On page 3, under the Managing section, answer the following questions. Do you collect data that will assist you in answering your specific questions, such as office referrals, attendance, and observations? Where is that data located? How or when do you review that data? Are there additional data sources that you will need to consider? Pause the video while you respond to these questions. The last question we will ask to ensure we are collecting the right data is, who else needs to be part of this conversation? While data can often give us an idea of what is needed, it's crucial to also consider input from other stakeholders like parents, staff, and administrators. Gathering more data from these sources increases our chances of accurately identifying the needs of our students. Pause the video as you turn to page 3 in your participant handbook and identify additional stakeholders that you can rely on to provide additional information. Having answered the questions that will help you identify the data to collect, you are now ready to begin your data analysis. Let's explore an efficient and effective data analysis strategy for teachers and administrators. The process I'm going to share is called a data deep dive. After collecting your data, look for patterns in the data. What is the story the data is telling you? Questions that can guide you include, is there a trend? Where are the peaks or where are the valleys? And finally, match the data to current perceptions regarding the questions you have. Next, you will dig deeper by asking clarifying questions that will help you create a hypothesis. These questions include, what is the problem? How often is the problem happening? Where is the problem happening? Who is involved or engaged in the behavior? When is the problem most likely to occur? And why is the problem sustaining? You may need to conduct a root cause analysis to find the answer to the last question. Finally, identify a solution that aligns with your hypothesis. Consider the resources that are available to you. Make sure you keep your solution simple and create an action plan to ensure you are considering all of the steps that will be required to implement the solution you have chosen. In the webinar, Disproportionality Infrastructure, you learned a process for selecting practices. Follow the systematic process for developing a plan to address the identified solution. As you learned in that webinar, you will first assess the effectiveness of your current practices. Consider, what are you doing in your LEA in the area of your identified root cause? If you have data that supports your current practices and those practices are working, continue doing them. Your action plan may just extend your implementation efforts, and that's okay if sound evidence supports it. Next, choose practices or programs that are directly aligned to your root cause to explore. Then check that these practices are measurable, evidence-based, and culturally sustaining. Finally, work with your colleagues and key stakeholders to select the most impactful practices to implement first. A critical part of this process is ensuring that the practices and programs you select are measurable, evidence-based, and culturally sustaining. Now let's practice applying the system. Be prepared to pause the video after each slide to record your answers on pages 4 through 6 in the participant handbook. At the start of the school year, Orion Elementary introduced new school-wide expectations and classroom routines. Although students initially responded positively, the principal and staff have since felt that these measures are not as effective. Based on this case study, what are some potential answers to these questions? Please pause the webinar here and write down your answer. Now let's compare. Some potential answers might be to question 1, when indicators or observations led the administrator and staff to believe the measures are no longer as effective. Have office discipline referrals increased? Question 2. Office discipline referrals, staff interventions, and observations may be the data that I will utilize. Question 3. I have access to this data in places such as Infinite Campus or in another data management system. Finally, I might want to include the administrator, teachers, and other staff members that work with the student. After deciding to use school office referral data, the principal and school leadership at Orion Elementary School access reports located in their data management system. The first chart on this slide shows the number of office referrals for the last 5 months. What trend do you notice? The second graph represents referrals by problem behavior. What areas are identified? The next graph is referrals by location, which identifies the locations where the problems are occurring. The last bar graph shows us referrals by time of day. Is there additional information that is missing that might be valuable in answering other questions you have? Additional data on referrals by race, ethnicity, and gender would also be essential. Pause the webinar as you walk through the data deep dive found on pages 5 through 6. Now let's write a hypothesis statement using the data you have accessed during your data deep dive. Pause the video while you write your hypothesis statement on page 6. Now let's compare our answers. Please note that our answers may vary depending on what data you chose to focus on. Here is an example of a potential hypothesis statement. Office discipline referrals have gradually increased since the beginning of the school year. The majority of problem behaviors being reported are disruption, defiance, language, and harassment. Most behaviors are occurring at 11:45 a.m. in the cafeteria. Following a root cause analysis, it appears that the main reason for these behaviors is the desire to gain attention from peers. Based on the hypothesis statement you have written, identify some possible solutions. Use the action planning process you reviewed in the previous webinar on disproportionality infrastructure to review steps for creating an action plan. In your handbook, brainstorm some possible solutions. Choose one that you can easily implement and that you have the resources and capacity to support. Pause the video as you capture your solution on page 6. One possible solution based on our hypothesis statement would be to teach or reteach behavioral skills. Questions that could guide our solution would be, what do I need to teach to solve the problem? And how will I reinforce the new behavior? Some examples of what we can do for this case study include provide explicit instruction linked to school-wide expectations. Teach what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. You could role play with your students. Or you could teach, remind positively, supervise and prompt, acknowledge and reteach. In your handbook, reflect on your system for teaching and reinforcing new skills. Pause the video while you complete this question. The final step in the system is refining our process. Consider how the questions on the next slide can be used to reflect on current practices and identify areas for improvement. Questions such as, have I been successful in improving student outcomes? How do I know? Were all of my questions answered? Are current practices sustainable? And how can I improve my process? Will help you to improve your practices and refine your system. An important part of this system is celebrating your successes and improvements. Before we talk more about using data to celebrate successes and improvements, let's celebrate your new understanding of coordinated systems by applying your data analysis skills to your own data. Remember that question we wrote down on page 2 at the beginning of this webinar? Write your response to that question, which was, what are some specific questions you want to answer using your own data, next to the activity located on page 6. Walk through the system you used for the Orion Elementary case study using your own data this time. That process is located on pages 4 through 6. Pause this webinar as you complete this activity. An essential aspect of data review is establishing a system for reflection and celebration. Create a schedule to regularly review your data. Ensure that the solutions you implement are achieving the desired results, indicating the effectiveness of your practices and programs. If necessary, consider alternative solutions based on your data and continue to monitor their impact. Take time to recognize successes and areas for growth in your practices. Establishing a system for celebrating achievements will foster a positive culture around your data collection efforts. As we wrap up, let's take a moment to process. As you consider all that you have learned today, reflect on these questions found on page 7 in your participant handbook. What is something you learned that squares with your beliefs? What are 2 questions still circling in your head? What are 3 crucial points you wish to remember? Please pause the video as you complete this section. Today is the 3rd in a series of 4 workshops designed to help you and your team address significant disproportionality. Workshop 4 is currently available. We hope you and your team will join us for the final workshop in this series. Each session is designed to build knowledge and skills that will conclude with an action planning session to set you up for success. Slides and materials from today's session will be available in Moodle. We also invite you to join us in the community of practice that is specifically designed for LEAs designated as SD1 and SD2. Here you will be able to learn from experts in the field, hear from LEA colleagues from across the state who have successfully navigated their way out of the SD designation, and engage with others who are grappling with some of the same issues that you are. We will have the community of practice dates and registration information posted before the next workshop. Thank you for your participation today.